So I want to introduce Anne, a dear friend, a longtime boot camp buddy. We refer to our boot camp as Camp Menopause, and an amazing proofreader. There would be many, many more typos in our book if she hadn't volunteered to proofread what the proofreader had done, and my conversation partner for today. So it's all yours, Anne.
All right. Thank you, Leah. Such an honor that you picked me. I'm so happy to be here. And it's really lovely to meet all of you. Just very quickly, before we just dive into the reason we're all here, which is we want to hear from Leah, I wanted to make one acknowledgement, which is to Charlie, Chuck, as many of us know him. And I just wanted to say, Chuck, we love you, and we thank you for your willingness and openness, and for loving Leah. So I wanted to acknowledge you. I think we all know Leah very well, and we know that Leah is an incredibly special person. And she's written an incredibly special book. Leah walks through life with this open heart and with this fierce curiosity. And she has written, fittingly, of course, a very special memoir, coming straight from her heart and from the way that she walks through the world. And what I've loved so much about this book are the multi layers of themes, and themes that I keep coming back to and thinking about, that we'll hear about today. But the themes for me that I keep thinking about are navigating and negotiating marriage, going for one's dreams, fearless adventure, and creating friendships and bonds with people, and living a life of service to others. So those were just some of the themes that I literally come back to, and I kind of reflect on from time to time. So let's dive in. It is my great pleasure to begin this conversation with Leigh Fisher. And Leah, let's kick it off with this just very big, open-ended question of what inspired you to take this trip?
Well, that inspiration started when I was in college, after graduation. And a lot of people have the senior year. It's like, okay, now what am I going to do with the rest of my life? And at that time, the Peace Corps was really in its heyday. We're talking 1966. And some of the bravest and the brightest of my classmates had signed up to go into the Peace Corps. It sounded just like a wonderful opportunity. And I filled out an application. But the thought of being gone for 2 years, being by myself in some country, they don't let you choose where you're going to go, was terrifying enough that I never mailed it in. And people who don't mail in their applications rarely get accepted in the Peace Corps. So that was a missed opportunity, and one that I never really forgave myself for. I'm not a youngster at this point, and I had made peace with an awful lot of things in my life. I just couldn't make my peace with having turned my back on something that really made my heart go pity-pat, and it felt like a betrayal. It felt like not being my own person, and it would have been so good in so many ways that it just nagged at me. So that's kind of where it started. Add a layer, my father had just died, and it dawned on me that if my dad could die, probably I could too. And what might I regret at the end of my life? And that's what popped up. So the kids were launched, supporting themselves, and I asked Chuck whether he would take a sabbatical and travel with me for a year.
And continue, Leah, and why then did you decide to travel on your own for a year?
Well, let's just say that it being a marriage sabbatical and a solo sabbatical aren't because I wanted it that way. It was because Chuck had his own commitments and his own priorities. And he said, no, this isn't the right time for me to do something like this. And my choice was to once again turn my back on something that I wanted so much I could taste it, or to go on my own. So there's where our marital negotiation skills came in. If I had just said, "Hey, buddy, I'm out of here. This is too important," that wouldn't have been the same story. So we spent a good deal of time talking about it. Here's my flippant version. He said, "I really want to keep working." And I said to him, well, how about if you keep working and I go traveling for a year? And eventually we came to some agreement that indeed we would do that with a lot of structure. By the way, Chuck, if that's not how you remember the conversation, thank you for sitting there quietly and letting me tell the story the way I remember it.
Thank you. I remember a conversation on a beach.
Yes. We were on the coast of Ecuador after having been in the Amazon and after having taken ayahuasca and having our beings changed in ways we would only find out as time went along. And I think I got a real infusion of courage, because here's this lingering dream for all these years, and it became something I could actually talk about and negotiate. So I give some credit to hallucinogens. Would it make sense at this point, Anne, for me to read an excerpt from the book?
That'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. I want to read just a short excerpt that takes place the night before I leave on this trip. Okay. My sabbatical is finally about to begin. I'm leaving for Costa Rica in the morning. My plan is to progress from easier to more challenging destinations, and I've been told Costa Rica would be a friendly place to start. I must be ready to go because I've been crabby with Charlie. Everything about him bugs me. It takes a while for me to understand what's going on. I think I've been trying to render Charlie unimportant so it won't be so hard to leave him. I confess this to my husband and wonder what I can do to overcome it. Charlie promptly replies, "Why don't you try saying, 'Charlie, you stud muffin, ravish me'?" Laughing, I let myself face the obvious. Life is fragile and finite. Something could happen to me or to him. In the game of tag, when you let go of home base, you're no longer safe. In the game of life, home base only provides the illusion of safety, but it is a comforting illusion. This solo journey definitely feels like letting go of home base. I had a disturbing dream a couple of weeks before my departure. In the dream, I look down at my hand and discover that my wedding band is broken. Instead of being a fully enclosed circle of metal, the ring has opened up. You know those key rings that have a little clip and you can open them wide? That's what this ring was like. The dream nags at me for days. Could I have secret plans for myself that will blow my life apart? The thought is frightening. When I describe my dream to a close friend, she listens carefully and then offers her wisdom. I think it means that you're breaking the confines of conventional marriage. You and Charlie are making more space in your marriage to allow you to pursue your dream. I feel relief. My friend is right. Charlie and I are loosening the marital ties, not out of indifference, but out of acceptance that we are separate people with separate dreams. Throughout my sabbatical, I will meet budget travelers of all ages. Many will have quit their jobs in order to travel, which means they'll face the uncertainty of finding new employment when they return. Some will have rented out their houses or sublet their apartments. They'll travel on public buses. While their financial circumstances may differ greatly, these adventure travelers have one thing in common. They've dared to let go. Each of them has relinquished the safe and familiar to make space for the new and unexpected. After so many years of yearning to join the ranks of these explorers, free spirits who set off without an itinerary, a timetable, or reservations, I feel amazed and elated that I finally gained the confidence and found the courage to be one of them. Now, I have a favor to ask of you. Would you try turning your microphones back on? I've been hearing nothing back, and I've been imagining everybody tapping their fingers and wanting to go away. And then I realized it's because your microphones are turned off. Anyway, if it's too noisy, we can say something. But when you don't laugh at the funny parts, I really feel lonely. Thank you.
We are laughing, Leah. We're laughing
Good.
and
Me too.
being touched.
So as we go along, as Anne,
If you find the one
What?
from,
Allowed to have it?
yes. Yeah, when they brought my lunch today, I had ordered coffee.
okay, whoever that is about ordering coffee, you should turn your microphone off. This feels a little like third grade, right? You can go out for recess. So,
Sorry, I'm in the hospital and I have to do this.
oh, okay.
Wow.
So the main theme of this book is about how to honor individual dreams while you also honor a long-term loving marriage. And in a way, that's the umbrella theme of this book. But while we're talking about the book, while Anne is asking questions, and then when you're asking questions, both to me and to everyone else who's here, be thinking about dreams of your own, either deferred dreams or new ones that are starting to emerge. My hope for the book is that it will help readers get in touch with dreams of their own and begin to think of it as something that they could possibly bring to life. That was what the work I needed to do, and that's the motivation that I had for writing this book. I'm pretty convinced that every one of us has a dream that's tucked in our back pocket that may have been there for decades. And your back pocket's behind you, and there's a lot keeping your attention in front of you. But I'm really hoping that both the book and our conversation today will just get you in touch with what might be lurking in your back pocket. So back to you, Anne.
That's a perfect segue, actually, Leah, into my next question, which was about courage and about being audacious. People have described you as audacious, and I'm just curious, why do you think they say this? And do you consider yourself audacious?
It's a great question, and in a way, you brought up two things. One is audacious, and the other is courageous. And here's what I understand about audacity: that audacity is daring to push up against things to find out where the walls are and what's possible and what's not. And there are limits that are just existential. they talk about death and taxes, but those are good examples of things you really can't negotiate with. And then there are a lot of other ways that we hold ourselves back, or we feel like we're being held back, that are in our minds, but not necessarily out, that if you push against them, something interesting would happen. And one of the limits is if you're married, you don't say, hey, I'd like to go traveling for a year, catch you next September kind of thing. And that can just feel like a given. So being willing to have a conversation with Chuck about, we're married, we love each other, you want one thing, I want another, or perhaps your timing is different from mine. What's possible that both of us can live with, that can give us each what we want? So once you've done it, it's like, okay, that's what we did. But up until that point, it can seem like those limits are existential, and why bother pushing up against them, because nothing's going to happen. So I think the audacity is the willingness to push up against social expectations. And then there's the thing about courage. You made a comment about fearless adventure, and I thought, fearless isn't quite accurate. And people would come and say, gosh, you're so courageous. And I would think, I wonder who they're talking about. That sure isn't me. Every time I left home, I was terrified, just terrified. I would get sick and be miserable. The mattresses would be horribly uncomfortable and my back would be funky. I never worried about our relationship. We'd really made an agreement that our relationship took priority over anything, and we truly decided that we could handle a year apart without damaging our commitment and our relationship. So I wasn't scared about that, but I think I was scared about just about everything else. And then as soon as I get on the plane, I'd start getting excited. Mm-hmm. So I was traveling in 4 segments. The agreement was for a year. I did it 4 months and then came home, and then 4 months and came home. And that was what we did. And in addition, our negotiation included that Chuck would take a 2-week vacation during each of those 4 months periods. So there was lots of back and forth. I would joke with people that I went home to visit with my children and see my friends, to check on my mom, who was had just turned 90 and had dementia, and to remind my husband he was happily married. So that was how I structured it. So here's what I concluded, and here's what I'd like to share with you. I don't feel like I'm courageous. I feel like I have an abundance of shy courage. And shy courage is courage. If being scared meant I had to stop. Anyway, think about shy courage. It makes a lot of room for taking risks and acknowledging that you might be a very frightened, timid, cautious person, and you're willing to take that step into the unknown.
I love that layered. Well, in what you've talked about so far, Leah, bumping up against the walls, you and Chuck, and navigating, I think you guys have become really great at negotiating. And so maybe speak a bit more deeply about how you guys negotiated, how you negotiate, and how do you see that being a benefit to other couples?
Okay, I want to talk about it just briefly because I want us to leave lots of room for other people's questions. When you take two really smart, really articulate, really with a big bratty sense of entitlement, your choice is to either fight a lot or to find a more constructive way of dealing with differences. And we tried the fighting a lot for several decades. And it's hard on children, and it's hard on a marriage friendship. And through, I mean, I don't need to give you the history. We decided, we bumped into this knowledge about negotiating. The Harvard Business School has a getting to yes model. And I decided that a model that could work for international conflict might be able to work for marriage too. And so we adapted it. We've refined it over the years. I've ran groups for couples around it, and it works a lot better than fighting and being scrappy.
Fantastic. Let's talk about goals. So when you set off, did you have specific goals or intentions when you were taking the journey?
It's really interesting. There were the goals that I knew I had, and then there were goals that found me that I didn't know I had, but as I realized them, as they happened, I thought, oh, right, that was something I wanted this trip to do. So the ones I was in touch with is I wanted to learn Spanish. And
Yes,
and I wanted to learn Spanish. I wanted to find out whether
I did mute.
I wanted to find out whether the skills of a psychotherapist could be useful in the world, or if they were just limited to sitting in a chair in a room. I really wanted to prove to myself that I could be on my own, and that I could be on my own without being terrified or lonely. And so those were the goals that I was aware of. And I met those. I learned how to speak Spanish like a very sophisticated 3-year-old. I was quite hopeful that it would improve bit by bit. I was in Costa Rica and Guatemala and Colombia and Cuba and Nicaragua. And what I didn't know at the time is that I would never speak Spanish better than a very sophisticated 3-year-old. So it's good I didn't know at the time. I discovered that you don't have to have an office or a formal setting to be very much of use with some clinical background. There were natural disasters where I was able to jump in and do disaster mental health work. A mudslide in Guatemala that had buried much of one small village, and an earthquake in Java when Chuck was visiting, which I had not intended to volunteer for, but we found ourselves close to the epicenter of an earthquake that killed 6,000 people. And our daughter Shala sent an email saying, "Are you guys all right? Are you alive?" And I emailed back and said, "Yes, we're alive." And she said, "Well, good, Mom. I know you were looking for a service project." So yes, there were lots of ways, informal ways to be helpful. And I think the most important goal that was successful was, although I was terrified before I left, I felt safe and I felt happy, and I discovered that you can be alone without being lonely, and that traveling on your own is a little bit of a myth. You're traveling, you don't know the people you're going to meet till you meet them, but you're not really traveling alone. Lane, I see you nodding head. Um, Lane lives in the United States, but you've lived in Indonesia for years now, right?
40 years.
Okay. And somehow, don't you feel like the universe comes and helps you out when you need something?
Not since I've been in the US. This is the weirdest place I have ever lived.
Okay. But what about in the part of the world you spent 40 years?
It was magical. I mean, I was in West Africa during the Ebola crisis. I worked with women in Afghanistan and schoolgirls in Pakistan, and it was, yeah, a life of service. I was shot at, I was threatened, but I was never scared.
Well, that's very impressive.
You just focus on the job at hand and know you're doing the best you possibly can and recognize an opportunity. Like when we met each other, that was a great opportunity. And that booklet that we created was distributed to every school child in the province. So thank you.
Yes, well, I'll quickly say this. There had been a psychoanalyst colleague of Chuck's who had developed disaster mental health trauma reduction workbooks for children. That he developed one after Katrina. And I knew I was going to Guatemala. I knew there'd been this disaster. I asked if I could take his workbook and modify it and translate it into Spanish for the children who had been affected by this. He said yes. I didn't tell him I'd have to learn Spanish to do it, but this workbook came out and was distributed, and I happened to have a copy when we were in Java and this earthquake came. And so there was the format. I got an artist to make coloring book pages, and then it was time to go home. I had just met Lane. In fact, that's a perfect example of my saying how the universe, I don't know, I don't want to sound too woo-woo, but it's about being on your own is not being alone. Lane is a social worker who was there, and I didn't know it at the time, but had connections with Australia's version of USAID. Some of you may remember that it once existed. And I asked her if she would take this baby and run with it. And in fact, that's what happened.
We did.
Yep, time is marching on. And what about posing one more question and then letting us open it up to people?
We can do that for sure. I was also going to invite you to read one more passage if you want, because I think it's lovely when you read from the book. Okay.
You bet. Okay, so this takes place in an indigenous community called Santiago Atitlan, which is on the shores of Lake Atitlan, one of the most beautiful lakes on the planet. And this is where the disaster had happened with the mudslide that buried this village. And I was working on translating that book while living with an indigenous family, one of the happiest families I've ever met. This community had just put together a consortium of mental health people from the area around this very small community. And I was invited to join the very first session of this collaboration. So during my early weeks in Santiago Atitlan, I repeatedly embarrassed myself by mistaking one traditionally garbed Maya person for another. One of the social workers invites me to accompany her to a training session for local midwives. Even though it's conducted in Sutuil and I comprehend nothing, I'm fascinated to encounter the women who deliver many of the community's babies. At a mental health commission meeting the next day, I warmly thank the social worker for bringing me along. She gives me a blank look and then graciously accepts my thanks. A few minutes later, in walks the woman who actually took me to the training session the previous day. I turn beet red and my face is still hot at the end of the meeting. On another occasion, I address one of the social workers as Angelica until she finally tells me, I'm Lucia. I don't know anyone named Angelica. Once again, I'm mortified. Must I constantly reveal that all Maya look alike to me? Then one day, the youngest of the 4 children in my host family comes to visit for the weekend. Diana is 26 years old and the only member of her family who speaks English. She lives and works in Guatemala City. Walking into the cozy kitchen and seeing me for the first time, she greets me warmly with, Hello, Katya. I return her greeting with a straight face, but I can barely contain my mirth. Here I am, 60-something, gray-haired, barely 5 feet tall, and petite. Katya, Katie, is 23 years old. She's a towering 5'10" with curly blonde hair, a loud, booming voice, and the strong athletic body of a former college swimmer. Suddenly, I get it. It's not just me. To a Maya person, all gringos look alike. Diana's faux pas helps me relax and forgive myself until little by little I get to know people in town well enough to keep them straight.
Beautiful. I really love hearing you read it. I will ask one last question, and then let's, as you suggest, let's open it up to everyone here so we have ample time for everybody's questions. But the last question is, what was the impact on your marriage of being apart for a year? How was it when you got back? Did it change you as a spouse? And have there been lasting changes for you as a couple? You and Chuck.
Great questions. Have you got an afternoon? So I guess the first thing I want to say is absence makes the heart grow fonder had nothing to do with this. What absence did was to help us see each other from a distance, to see each other as separate people. Remember thinking about my husband and then thinking, Chuck isn't my anything. He's his self. I'm myself. And so the absence and the separation really gave us a sense of respect for the other person as being different. I think one of the most important things was that after I came back and reflecting back on it, we realized that we had been renegotiating and reconfiguring without being aware of it, what a good later life marriage could look like. That we had come to need different things, to have different opportunities, to notice that we were closer to the goalpost than we had ever been before, which makes a sense of urgency about being really true to yourself, really fulfilling yourself in the sense of becoming more fully who you are. And we were on a path to doing that. So I went off thinking I was healing from the betrayal of not going to the Peace Corps, which indeed I was, but came back and reflecting on it, we were reconfiguring our marriage. And in a way, I think that's lasting, that there's more flexibility and more spaciousness in it. I haven't gone off for another year, but in small ways and in big ways. We have a more spacious sense of what a good marriage can be. When you're raising little kids, that much spaciousness is not very functional. When you're in your 60s, having to live by the patterns and the expectations of when you were raising little kids doesn't feel great either. I'm sure you guys have been hearing about gray divorce. The fastest increasing rate of divorce is among, this is mind-boggling, is among people 65 and older. It is increasing by 3 times from what it was 30 years ago. And I'm quite convinced that a factor in it is boredom. And that what made perfect sense at an earlier stage of life is boring and somewhat constricting later on. So I think we were experimenting and exploring alternatives without any conscious awareness. Chuck, do you want to say anything about that? Because it's a big deal and it involved you a lot.
Sure. Well, I basically agree with everything you said.
What a keeper.
Well, that could be elaborated, but I think it would be a good time to hear folks' questions.
Okay, good.
Great.
Before we go there, I just want to say that 5 years after my sabbatical, Chuck wanted to take a sabbatical, and we spent 6 months traveling together. So that's an impact that it had. And the other person to whom I'm very grateful for change is Governor Gavin Newsom, who, when COVID hit, said you had to work from home. And we began to have the closeness and the intimacy and the time together that I had wanted all along. So in my acknowledgments at the end of the book, I have a big thank you to the governor.
Oh, wow.
I'm sure he's thrilled.
I haven't sent him a copy. Maybe
You
I
need to
should.
send him a copy.
Good. We need to.
Great. Well, this is time for all of you to ask questions. So you can either use your fancy little hand or your regular hand. So the first hand I see is from Steve. So go ahead, Steve.
Hi, Leah. I read your book just recently and very impressed. But what I thought is that there are many people who take marriage sabbaticals. So many, like people who come here or move from poor countries to richer countries to work. They don't have enough money. Mostly men come to, say, the United States, and they work, and they're separated from their spouse, from their children, not for just a year, but for more than a year sometimes. And going back and forth every 4 months is not very practical. They don't have the money, and crossing the border is difficult. So one of my grandfathers did that. So did you look at other people like that who've taken marriage sabbaticals for economic reasons, let's say, and risked their marriage, the safety of their home, gone to a place where they didn't know the language, because they thought the priority of getting money to support their family was higher the home base that they knew before?
You know, it's a great question, and I would say those are two really different categories. Mine was so optional. This is a book that is about such a privileged person at a privileged time of life and whatever, that I have tremendous respect for the real courage it must take to let go of everything you've known on a permanent basis. For me, it was a form of play. And boy, that year of traveling made me more playful and more skillful at being playful. And I don't think that's what's happening when you're living on another continent to make enough money to support a family. What other questions? Oh,
Sorry, how about Barbara Boyle?
Yep, I'm on, right? You can hear me?
we're on.
Leah, so nice to see you and to see Charles. This is exciting. Or Chuck. As you know, I love your book. I love you. I think you're the best. And I know this book is about encouraging all of us to follow a dream, and whatever dream that may be, find a way. But I also see it as a love story, a very kind of different love story. And I don't know if you agree with that, but if you were to, what love story would you think you and Chuck have? You know, what famous play or book or story that's been out there over the years would you say you are the characters in that? What kind of a love story?
First of all, Barbara is a fellow author with the same publisher, She Writes Press, and we have gotten to know one another, as is Carol Odell. Will you raise your hand, Carol? And we've had the pleasure to meet weekly by Zoom and get to know each other very well. Barbara, my honest answer is I have no idea. It's a brilliant question, and I haven't got a clue. Chuck, what about you?
No, I could imagine all kinds of fantasies that would be fun to play with, but the question, I agree, it's a great question. Who will play us in the movie is actually my question. especially you.
Meryl Streep, easy breezy, but I don't know about you.
I think maybe a George Clooney with a little makeup. But would you agree it's a love story as well? Because I am married as well, and we have a little bit of independence in our marriage. You know, kind of having met halfway through our lives, we sort of who we were when we met. You know, so it's the best love I've ever had, but it's different when you're grown up. And I'm just wondering, don't you think yours is a love story as well?
You know what? How wonderful that you think of it that way. It's going to shift my perception and my perspective. Here's what I do know. This book kind of lacked a happy ending for quite a long time after I started. I spent 15 years writing this book. Sure. And part of the problem was it needed a happy ending. And we kind of drifted back to where we were before. I enlisted a therapist I had known who was a devoted, committed Buddhist, and I met with her for a couple of years. And what I got out of the therapy is that a good enough marriage is a good marriage. That's the love story.
It's enough.
It's the love story.
Seems like a special one, though, Charles, that you would respect who Leah is and what she needed, and Leah, that you would compromise a little bit your dream to keep the two of you together. I think that's super powerful.
I've also heard you, Leah, say that your love has never been deeper, and I wonder if that has come from writing this book, the travel years, the years post. That's what resonated with me when Barbara said love story. I remember that you've made that comment to me multiple times.
Yes. I guess it was a process. I think it happened slowly. But when it really burst into bloom was when Governor Newsom told my husband he needed to stay home. And he discovered that he lived in a beautiful house and he had a very nice wife. And things have been quite sweet since.
Wonderful.
I want to tell you one more thing, and it has to do with Chuck's pseudonym in the book of Charlie. If you're going to give someone a pseudonym, that's not a little bit lame. The original title thought of by Chuck was to call this book Travels Without Charlie. Which makes all of us laugh. Unfortunately, our publisher is 30 years younger and undoubtedly not an English major, and she just thought that was a very peculiar title. So I grieve that title. It was quite perfect.
Yeah,
That's why he's Charlie.
Clearly all old. Hand up.
Who else? Okay, so Lane, put your hand up if you have a question. I want to make sure we get to everybody's question. So everyone who does have a question, put your hand up. Okay, so I see Lane and I see, let me see any more hands. Okay. Oh, I see gentleman. It says Holly, but I think you're your cousin. Okay.
It's a simple question. What is the title of the book again?
The title of the book is My Marriage Sabbatical, a memoir of solo travel and lasting love.
And Leah will tell everybody where they can get this at the end. Okay, so Lane, your question?
Yeah. Leah, I find it's just amazing because, I'm also, of course, working on a memoir, and my working title is White Privilege. So that resonates beautifully with things you've said before.
Yes.
What I want to ask you is, how the heck did you find a publisher? I've got 6 academic books published, but a memoir or a novel? How do you do that? I have no idea.
Carolyn, Barbara, and I can make a suggestion. I was lucky enough to connect with Judith Viorst, who's the author of Alexander and His No Good, Very Bad Day, and a psychoanalytic book that is my Desert Island book. And when I showed her what I was working on, she introduced me to her agent, who was a hotshot Manhattan agent, very excited to represent the book. I took so darn long finishing it that he died.
Oh.
So fast forward a decade, more than a decade, and I put out a few queries to agents. It is virtually impossible, unless you know someone who's married to someone,
Yep.
to get a yes, and that's only opening the first door. There is a publisher She Writes Press is located here in Berkeley and other places as well. It's an all-women writers press, and they're very supportive of memoir. And so that's how the 3 of us met. And what I love best is, in the process of publishing it, each season of writers has a cohort, and we get to interact as often as we want with one another. And oh my God, that's helped us through some tight spaces.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm envious.
It's out there. It's out there.
Yeah, just find it. Yeah.
Okay, and I'd be happy to email you about it if you want.
Thank you. Yeah, I think being in California probably makes things easier too. I'm in Florida, and they just, just not conservative enough for them.
Yes. She has authors from all over the U.S. and a number of other English-speaking countries. So
Fantastic.
thank you.
We definitely have time for some more questions.
Joanne has her hand up.
Joanne, great. Okay. Joanna, sorry.
Hi.
Hi.
I love the book, and I love this discussion. Has been wonderful. Everything about it. So I appreciate your highlighting for all of us that we think about what our passion project would be or what our dream is. But I'm actually feeling not so original and feeling like mine is somewhat like yours. Maybe not a whole year or a whole Peace Corps type thing, but more travel, solo travel. And I wonder if you could speak to your observations about traveling by yourself versus traveling with Chuck.
Wonderful question.
Any other travel, anybody traveling with people versus traveling by yourself.
Okay, my experience, of course, traveling by myself and traveling with Chuck. Traveling with Chuck wasn't scary. It wasn't scary before. It wasn't scary when we got on the plane. I really felt like someone had my back. When I went to Colombia, it was with Chuck. I figured we'd have less risk of getting kidnapped if there were two of us. And we had less encounters with other travelers and with people living in the communities we visited. People see a couple and it's sort of like, well, you know, they've got what they need, whereas you're alone. We met a couple that, not Chuck and I, but traveling solo, it was with Leslie. I can't see her in the boxes, but Leslie and I were in Nicaragua.
Guatemala.
In
Guatemala.
Guatemala, that's right. Climbing up a ladder. No, it was when we went to Lake Nicaragua and we were on a boat and there was a steep, straight up ladder to get from one level to another. I have on this heavy little lady backpack and I'm about to flip backwards. Some guy at the top reaches out, grabs the strap of the backpack and pulls me up. We ended up spending 3 days with this guy and his wife, having a marvelous time. He referred to his wife as my award-winning wife, and she called him her award-winning husband. And Chuck and I borrowed that over the years. And that wouldn't have happened had we been traveling together. So that's true.
One logistical thing, and now I'll come to, I see a hand. Really quickly, Leah, if you put your cursor on the right-hand side of all the boxes, there's actually 2 screens of people. So there are people.
Hello, lovely people.
So do you see? Yeah, so there's other people
Hi,
here. I just wanted to make sure you got to see everybody.
Judy, hi, I'm so glad you told me.
Yeah. So we have a question. I'm sorry, I don't know your name. I see your hand up.
Marty.
Marty.
I am Leah's loving cousin, who loves her, that is. I've known you for many, many years, and I know from some of our conversations how difficult it was at times to get this whole project together. But I am, without taking any responsibility, I think it's I'm really proud of all that you have encountered and all that you overcame to put this together. I know that it was a work of love, but also an extremely difficult project, you know, on
You're
your
talking
part.
about the book, not the trip.
Yeah, well, yeah, not with Chuck. I just meant about
Yeah.
the book. You know, Chuck is a separate issue. But seriously,
They're cousins. They're
yeah,
first
exactly.
cousins.
But I had a question for you, and I also have a question for you, Chuck. You mentioned in the beginning that it took you a while to negotiate to take this trip. And just quickly, I was curious to know if how long that process took. Did you use your own background experience in couples counseling to help you in that direction? And Chuck, I would ask you a question that while Leah was away, did you think of writing a parallel book of what it felt like when she was away?
Can I start?
It's your day.
Yes, please.
Sure.
Queen for a day. I would say that I was hinting and softening Chuck up for several years before this conversation. And again, for the prospect of our doing this together, I would tell him quite truthfully, I'm feeling that kind of antsy feeling I have when something needs to change. And 6 months later, I'd say, you know, it feels like something is going to change. I don't quite know what it is, but I know that feeling. So when things involve change, I don't drop them on my award-winning husband, but kind of warm up to it. Go back, and what was the last question you asked? Because that was the one I found really
Did you use your skills as a couples counselor to help you with this process of taking the trip and negotiating with Chuck?
Sure. in the sense of using my best manners, occasionally we'll get into a scrap and we'll say to each other, is that what you tell your couples in therapy? You know? So this negotiating process based on the Harvard Business School project had everything to do with our becoming skillful. That wasn't the question. It was the one you asked us both.
Well, the question I asked Chuck was if he was ever considered writing a parallel book
That's the
while
one.
you were away.
I asked Chuck if he would write a chapter called What's in It for Me? Because I imagine spouses, husbands saying to a wife who says, oh, I'd really like you to read this book, saying, well, what was in it for him? And what you said was that I could interview you, but you were not going to write your own chapter. So take it away, Chuck.
So my main answer is it felt like being the ground crew for an astronaut. But if I were if I were to write a book, which I would not, at least not this one. Part of it would be about things that I experience that are different than when Leah's around, such as going to the opera, and Leah doesn't love opera, that kind of thing. But the other part would be about literally being mission support. For example, she had so much of something or other that she couldn't carry it all at once. So I
Medications.
medication, right? A bunch of medication to her in Costa Rica. And then the other thing is, so when she was in Guatemala and translated this book, the disaster child mental health book, but also with expert input from local cultural experts to help mend the Spanish so that it was not only Spanish, but it was culture specific. Also got culture specific drawings that kids could identify. Oh, those are drawings that look like their family in a disaster. A wonderful book. And so how to get it published? Leah went through a bunch of agencies
And NGOs.
to look for support. Didn't come very fast. But it turns out publishing a book in Guatemala doesn't cost a whole lot. So she emailed me. I emailed a list of friends, family friends. Could you donate some money for this book? And in about a week or two, we had enough privately raised money just to send her funds and publish the book. And that was the part that felt like ground support for the astronaut. The other part was I got to go into outer space and visit you in these places, and that was also.
Yes, you did. One of the things in this interview, when I interviewed Chuck, was what was nice about having me gone. And one of your answers is not having to debate about the best way to load the dishwasher. And I cannot tell you how many couples in therapy and friends that I know have these heated disagreements about how to load the dishwasher. Could I see a show of hands of people who've had that conversation? I got to check the.
I haven't learned yet.
Okay, I see. Who on page one? Okay. Isn't that funny? Isn't that random and funny?
So funny.
And it goes back to the idea of being separate people. That from a couple as being like an entity, there is only one right way to go to a and obviously it's mine. But there's something about this spending some time apart, seeing your partner at a distance, that that makes it easier to realize that there's not a right way and a wrong way. There's your way and my way.
Other questions? Let's take more questions. These questions are fantastic.
I have another question, if you don't mind.
Question, it could be question or comment. Of course, Marty, go ahead.
What did you miss most while you were separated, Leah?
Now, come on, what do you think?
Well, what about your relationship did you miss? Apart from the sex.
Yeah, you're bad.
You just gave it away. Yes, my mattress. My mattress and getting to play on it.
Okay.
Jerry,
Yeah, this is a question maybe for both of you. What were the feelings that you had as you looked forward to, meeting up in these 2-week stints? Maybe it was different each time. I don't know. So the feeling, anticipation to the meeting up, and then the feeling when the 2 weeks was over.
Man, you know how to load a question, Jerry. That's amazing. Chuck, do you want to start?
Sure. I got very inured to the leaving part of it. I especially remember walking through some dark street in Antigua, Guatemala, after some intense local New Year's celebration, knowing I was leaving the next morning. That was sad. Leaving at 4 a.m. or something like that. But I got to be kind of inured to it. I was always excited to, it was doubly nice to get together with you, but also in some exotic place, which usually you had already explored and knew something about. So that was kind of cool.
Mm-hmm.
So here are some of my recollections. When Chuck would, well, first of all, Jerry, yes, it was different times. After that earthquake, Chuck had his reservations to go home the very next day.
Wow.
I was flying, we both had to fly back to Bali, him to go home and me to find a place to live. And so that separation was, I wanted to go home too. So that's really different from the others. When he would arrive, I would feel both excited, and then I had this weird reaction, which is that I felt a little fearful of the intimacy. We joked that it felt like I went back to being a virgin, and that's how big a separation it had been. And my sweet husband knows how to, he's very good with a virgin. So anyway, we would always find our way back. What was harder was when he left. I would feel absolutely bereft. Bereft the way a 3-year-old feels when their mama goes away. And it never changed. Each time he left, I would feel bereft. But by the second time and the third time, I was able to say to myself, oh, right, here it is.
Right.
Here's the bereft part, and you'll get through it. But it didn't stop the feeling. It changed my relationship to the feeling. Then on a much more practical level, when he would come, I'd stop being a budget traveler. Instead of, the worst mattress was a foam one that must have been 30 years old, and it was a good 3 inches on the edges, and it was maybe a half an inch on top of the boards, okay? And then he would come and make a reservation in or a, some kind of a mansion or whatever, and felt like queen for a day. And so we would hire guides and we'd go on side trips, and the mattresses were exquisite. And then he'd go home and boom, I would be back to my, live on the cheap, find a place to live, tolerate the different mattresses. And so and go back to that solo traveler mode.
So it was like a holiday from your vocation, your
It-
your sabbatical vacation.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was, but it was also, it was like an economic divide that I went from being a very financially privileged person to how inexpensive can I make my next meal or my next night,
Right.
whatever.
Let's talk a little bit about that, Leah, because I think it was sounded to me like partly on a budget, but partly, you know, you wanted to have a homestay. And maybe you can talk about why you chose to do homestays.
Yeah.
So it was a choice to economize, is that right?
I was trying to get as far and as long as I could on the savings from my therapy practice. So it was self-imposed. Obviously, Chuck would have. It was self-imposed. And that's sort of kind of a frugal human being just by nurture, nature, who's going to say.
So Chuck never
Also-
said you can do this, but I'm not going to support you financially while you do it.
Never said that. Also, just to say, the mansion.
I'm playing with you.
Yes.
The mansion in Antigua, Guatemala, the mansion hotel cost $50 a night.
Oh God.
And that was it was luxurious.
Yeah.
Yes. So, and about staying with families. I don't know where to start with it. It was so important and it was so meaningful, partly because instead of being in a hotel, you're right in the middle of a community. I went out of my way to find families that had preschool children because they are the masters of play. And I had so much fun playing with other people's children. The most therapeutic thing you can do for parents is to love their children. And so that was part of it. But also, I told you about shy courage. This was a safe place from which to tiptoe out. And so that was my home base. It's so many things that I needed or wanted came in that package. There are 3 families, one in Guatemala, one in Costa Rica, and one in Bali, that I've stayed very engaged with. I helped one family get their child, pay their way through college, and I've gone back to visit each of these families. But they really were my launching place and the place I would come home to. What I haven't mentioned is that I have a shockingly horrible sense of direction.
Oh.
In a way, it made it all the funnier that I was traveling the world. My motto is, you're not lost till it's time to come home. So anyway, so those families were an anchor. I always knew my way home to those families.
So glad we get to talk about that. Well, let's do a quick time check. It's 2:15, and I don't know how long people want to hang out. How long do we want to hang out? How long do you, Leah and Chuck, want to hang out?
Just the right amount of time. I'm guessing people probably are ready to move along.
Okay.
But
okay. So before Leah gives just a couple last closing remarks, anyone else have a final comment or question?
I have a follow-up question is, how did you choose the countries you went to during your sabbatical?
Costa Rica, because it was friendly. My goal was to go from easiest to hardest. So Costa Rica was friendly. Jerry, you were with me, I think, when we visited Brad in Guatemala and fell in love with this lake. So that was on my agenda.
Yes.
Molly, the woman who had taken Chuck and me to the Amazon, was speaking a year later at a conference in Bali. I had always wanted to see Bali, so I went and was her roommate at this conference and then along. Colombia, because Europeans that I met in Latin America, I'd say, what's your favorite place? And they'd say Colombia. It's incredibly.
Wow.
I grabbed Chuck, we went together, and I practiced saying in very bad Spanish in case we got kidnapped. If you can get any money out of our children, the more power to you. And Cuba, because I wasn't supposed to.
I'm sorry, which?
Cuba, because I wasn't supposed to.
Okay, all right, yeah. And Java?
Java was just sightseeing from
Oh.
Bali when Chuck was there.
Okay. Mhm.
The other reason for Cuba was that, so Jerry's my buddy from college. And at Stanford, when other people were very involved in politics, I was on the 11th level of the stacks writing term papers. And the whole Bay of Pigs and all of that stuff was coming down. And I knew nothing about it. And when I think about having squandered college, I didn't know you were supposed to do anything except study and write term papers. I was so unhappy with myself for being so asleep through all these political. I was taking Western Civ history while missing the history that was being made right there. So going back to Cuba was really a question of going back and finding out, well, what did happen and what role did Kennedy play? And then what I found out is that history was in the making right there and then, with the whole business of embargo and how much young Cubans want to know what's going on in the world. Turns out that the hourly cost of internet is higher in Cuba than any place else in the world.
Wow.
And the goal, they have intranet, you can get all the information you need, but boy, they make it expensive to connect with the outside world. Sarah.
Yes, Sarah, and then Leslie.
Hi again, Leah. I'm so proud of you. God, all those years ago, you were writing this book and sharing with us the progress. I just wanted to say how I'm reflecting back on my time in Guatemala and Lake Atitlan and Santiago Atitlan, and really just great memories, Antigua and all that. So that's a real gift for me today. I'm inspired to write again. I just wrote a poetry book, but I'm doing this journey. I'll have to call you sometime and we can talk about it. But we're living up on the mountain, a city girl all my life, Bay Area, living in this small town in the Sierra foothills on an old homestead. And I really want to start documenting and write about it, But yeah, your story is just inspirational. I can't wait to read it.
Thank you. Well, Sarah, what you're bringing me back to is that I hope this conversation does help you take a peek at the dream that might be in your back pocket.
I love that.
It's my goal for the book, and sure, I love attention, but what I really want most from this gathering is to help remind you of dreams that have been tucked away, that still are dreams if you sit quietly enough to